Hey everyone, how's it going? It's been a while since I've done a video, but this is a rare occasion, honestly. So, Guile is the newest unit. I've had a bunch of time to test him. Even though he released literally yesterday, I've been spending many hours grinding, building him fully. Now he's at plus 30, great, right? And I've just been testing him a bunch. Well, I've realized how strong he is and how incredibly broken he is right now. So, today I really want to talk about Guile, and this video is going to be focused talking around him and the counter mechanics, and him comparing to 2P as well, and just the current meta of everything. So let's start this off first of trying to explain how counter works. Counter is its own damage type, so all of the tanks and everything in the game can't mitigate that damage from counter unless they have take less counter damage or damage taken skill. If a skill says you take less damage, if it says you take less physical damage, then that's not going to count towards counter, so you can't really tank that. And there isn't really any tanks in the game for counter, so that's a massive problem, because we've played this game for so many years, and counter is kind of a new-ish mechanic that is now being discovered with 2P and now Guile being just incredibly broken because it's a different damage type, its own damage type. I also want to explain how to increase counter's damage. So for Guile, I'm going to be using him as the example in this instance. So Guile is an earth unit, but you have to make sure to use an earth weapon if you want earth counter, if you want his counters to be earth element. So anything that increases earth damage. So his trait 1 here says 100% earth damage. This will count towards his counter damage, so that's great that you make sure you have an earth weapon, otherwise his counters aren't going to do a whole lot. Other ways to increase your counter damage can obviously be by anything that just increases damage, and anything like earth attack race skills for Guile is going to be great because it's more earth damage, so those are amazing. But also we've got these counter boosts, and these skills are probably arguably the best skills you should be using on a counter unit, because these increase counters damage by just a ridiculous amount. Counter boost 2 just increases damage by 50%, and that's just a whole lot. If you stack a bunch of counter boost skills on the unit, then they're going to be doing ridiculous damage with their counters. Counter boost 4 is 100% more damage, so you definitely want to make sure to be using the counter boost skills as much as possible. If you did get the LR Ark from Guile's banner, then you can use Counter Boost 3 on Guile and increases counter damage by like 75% more, so that's just insane. Make sure to benefit from those counter boost skills and anything that increases the specific element damage. Also, another thing about counter is it does kind of work similarly to physical attacks, because it will scale off of strength, and having higher strength will increase the damage of the counter a bit, but it's not as important as the damage modifier skills. So now we've talked a bit about counter and how that works, I want to talk more about Guile. So here is how Guile works. If you look at his trait 2, this is where his counter is. You may notice he doesn't have the counter skill in his kit, but it's very similar to 2P, but he works a little bit differently, because he has to use a skill stock of his skill 1 to be able to activate his counter, which does kind of, you know, not make it as good in a way, but trust me, that doesn't matter, he's just still ridiculously strong. You have to make sure you have skill stocks of your skill 1. His skill 1 is his most important skill in his entire kit, because he only has 2 base skill stocks of his skill 1. So make sure you use skill stock 1, that's incredibly important. If you have his paid clothes, then that increases his skill stock 1 by another one, so that is incredibly strong as well. And yeah, just make sure to focus on his skill 1. As well as that, just to help with his skill 1, if he's standing still, he also gets more SET recovery speed, so that does help and kind of like cancel it out a little bit. Not fully, but getting 150% more SET recovery speed for his skill 1 is just insane. So that is about Guile's counter. Now I want to talk a bit more about Guile and why he is so broken. Give counter an anti-human type effect. This one is insane because most tanks in the game are going to be a human type. This on him is just incredibly strong. Let's have a look at the skills. I just want to tell you why exactly he is so powerful. The main one here being this skill. You won't move and you won't auto attack based on battle settings. So he's just going to be sitting there crouching and doing nothing, which is a good thing because you don't want him to do anything at all. You don't want him to trigger the enemy's counter, so he can never trigger an enemy's counter ever if you've got the skill on, which is amazing. When you're standing still, damage taken minus 50%. So this is all damage taken, so it includes physical, any type of damage, magic, counter damage, every damage in the game, you take 50% less damage. It's crazy. And that just makes him even better in PvP. If you have flinch resistance on him, like Pirate Ship in the team, then he's just going to be crouching there and taking 50% less damage until he triggers his counter, and then he's going to be doing ridiculous damage with his counter and just kill everything, so that's crazy. Another skill that I want to mention is No Need for Talk. This one is also very good. The main reason why I think it's so amazing is because when you defeat an enemy with a counter, it restores 5 seconds of SCT. So this will stack with Pose of Glory, which will give you SCT as well when you kill an enemy. So getting 5 seconds here and then more SCT from Pose of Glory is just amazing and can pretty much almost get your SCT for your skill stock 1 back from just killing an enemy. So it is amazing because it stacks, and SCT is always super important. That's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about with his skills. The main ones were the ones I said down here. His unique ones are just incredibly strong and make him insane, especially this skill right here. I love it so much, and it's just incredibly funny watching him just sit there and countering and not doing anything. It's stupid. It shouldn't exist. Another thing I want to say is, if we go back to his counter of his trait 2 quickly, when skill 1 has a stock and physically attacked on the ground, use a stock to activate a powerful counter. So why I'm saying this again is because this is guaranteed. It doesn't say it, but it isn't random. That's what makes this so good as well, is if you just get hit with one single hit, this is guaranteed to counter as long as it's a physical attack and he's on the ground. So that is amazing because you have a way to guarantee him to counter. And as you know, 2P with her randomness with counter, a lot of people didn't like that because it was just you got to get lucky. But with Guile, it's a lot more controlled, but it does make him way more powerful because it is more reliable. And as long as you've got a lot of SCT for his skill 1, he should be guaranteed to trigger his counter from his trait 2. And as long as he's on the floor, that's very important too. So if he's in the air, I don't think he can trigger this counter from his trait, but it is still amazing that it's a 100% chance to activate this counter when he's on the ground. So I want to be talking about how you are supposed to be building Guile. So from all the knowledge and stuff we talked about earlier, talked about attack raise skills and increasing your damage with counter skills and stuff like that. But obviously you don't want to just increase your counter damage because he is meant to be a tank as well. So being tanky is incredibly important. So my current build isn't perfect. I am still adjusting it, and I've still got to do more testing with him. But at the moment, this is what I currently have. He is at 130 SC, but don't worry about that. I just want to talk about these skills that I have used on him to make him incredibly strong. So what are these counter skills I have on him because they're very important? Like I said earlier, counter boost skills, they just increase counter damage by so much that you really should be using them. If you didn't get counter boost 3, if you didn't get the LR Ark, then it's very sad because this skill is incredibly strong for counter units. Even though we don't have many in the game right now, this is amazing for Guile. I have counter on him just because in case he runs out of his skill 1 stocks, then he still has a chance to activate a counter, and maybe that normal counter could kill an enemy and give him SCT, so then he can activate his trait 2 counter, and that's what I'm thinking. I've still got to do more testing with that because there is probably still a chance that the normal counter could overtake his trait counter instead, and you don't want that to happen, which is why normal counter was bad with 2P because she was random and her trait counter was so much stronger than normal counter. But with Guile, I think it's a little bit different. Well, quite a bit different, because his counter is guaranteed. I just think having counter here, just in case you run out of skill stocks, I think that's a good idea. Guile can feint, so that is a very important thing that you must be wary of. So a solid counter, when you're countering, then you can't feint from enemy attacks. So this is amazing. I do recommend to use this if you are not currently, because for 1 SC, this is just incredibly useful. Not being able to feint while you're countering is just very good. And on top of that, I would recommend to put on feint resist just in case. The alternative is using an accessory, this one, if you have it, because then you can just not feint ever. And this is a good accessory, it's very good, but I'm not using it because I am focusing on his element resistances, and I think feint resist with solid counter is good enough to work most of the time, and I haven't seen a case where he's been feinted with this setup yet, so I think this still works fine. I have attack raise 1, 2, 3, and 4, so this is a hell of a lot of damage because they do multiply and stack up to add even more damage. I think I might change this or remove one of them because it's probably not necessary, honestly. I think it's probably a better idea to remove one of these, maybe attack raise 2, and keep one of them, so then I can use the SC into more damage mitigation skills, because I think him being tanky is going to be a hell of a lot more important than doing damage. So, reason why I'm saying that is because counter does a lot of damage anyway, and if you use a few SC on counter boost type skills, then you're not going to need to stack endless damage skills on him, because you want him to survive and counter, so you need to find a balance there. Sky High does include every single damage type in the game, so that's why I have it on Guile. It's just, these skills are very good, you should be using these on a lot of units, especially in PvP, because they count towards magic, physical, and counter attacks, because it's more damage when the enemy's in the air. So I like having Sky High 1 and 2 just because they are very cheap skills for the damage that they're giving you, so I would recommend to use those. They're just very nice to have. Having a lore stack, since he is going to be the main tank on your team, this is going to be incredibly important. He has a lore already, but Girls Party to add another stack of a lore is going to be useful as well. You want to have as much enemy attention drawn +1 as possible, so keep an eye on that. Stock skill 1, I said earlier, you must have this. In PvP, anywhere that you use him, you definitely want to have this, because his skill stocks of his skill 1 are just incredibly low, so this is incredibly important. And now, I have a couple damage mitigation skills here: Stone World, Resonance Barrier, Christmas Cowl. Ideally, you would want to have more than this. This is just my build for my attack team at the moment, which has still been working. Like, Stone World, I think, is incredibly good because then you nullify piercing effects from enemies, and that's just amazing. Any of these, a lot of these skills are very strong. Like, I do like using this because less critical damage taken, more HP and defense is going to be nice. Christmas Carol is all damage, that's why I'm using that. Durability, I would use this, I would recommend using this because 10% less physical damage is just perfect for him, so that's very good. Cloak of Majesty is all damage in PvP, but it's a bit expensive at 7 FC, but you could use that if you really want to. So now let's have a look at his equipment. So this is my current build. I would recommend to use this spear if you have it. If you don't, then you should be getting it Godforged, because the spear is from an SSR Ark, and then you can just Godforge it, and it's probably his best in slot weapon, I think, because we don't have many earth weapons, and this increasing earth attack damage, as you know, is also going to increase his counter damage, so I just really like the spear. And as well as that, since it's a spear, you can put on spear boost skills, and that will allow him to take even less physical damage. So if you have spare SC, then you could put on spear high boost and spear boost and allow him to take even less physical damage. So that is just the best of both worlds, really. You're taking less damage and you're also doing more counter damage because it's got earth attack damage, so gotta love that. Now, I do have both of his paids. I think they are his best in slot for sure, so that's why I'm using them. I'm not going to talk about other recommended equipments because I did talk about that in the stream. Like, I literally talked about everything that I recommend, but what I am currently using, I think this is probably the best you could use. You could switch out a few, like this accessory. Like, I was considering using a damage mitigation accessory instead of this one, and the main one I was thinking of was Amulet of the Bow, just because you take 10% less damage and you also get all these ailments, and ailments are going to be incredibly important, because one thing I noticed recently, if you are inflicted with Curse, you don't get any SCT recovery at all if you have Curse inflicted on yourself. So having Curse nil is going to be incredibly important for PvP. and if you're in guild battles or if you're up against AV, then you want to make sure you have nil plus 1, so 1 over nil, so then they can't reduce your nil resistance to res and then be able to inflict the ailment on you, you know. But next thing is I want to have a look at Arks. So the main one that most people have been using on 2P but can also be used on Guile is Blaze Garden. The reason why this is so strong is because you get a maximum of 30% more damage and take 30% less damage, and that is all damage types and doing all damage, so that counts towards counter and taking less damage to everything. I just love it. Everyone likes using this. And you also get 25% more HP, which you don't need, but it's still nice to have it. The only problem with it is you have to have a support in the team or someone in the team that has a bunch of mimicry skills. So if I quickly go over to Renna, you can see I've got all these mimicry skills because Blaze Garden does require every single type in the party. Make sure you build your team depending on what types you have in your team. So if you have a god type in your team, for instance, then you're not going to need god mimicry, and you can just use whatever you don't have in your team. So definitely recommend doing this because this is arguably the best arc to use on counter units in the game currently for 2P and Guile, but there are other options if you don't want to do that. And the second best option maybe is probably going to be New Year Wishes, and this does give 25% more damage and take 20% less damage, so it's kind of the same thing as Blaze Garden but not as good. But you don't have to have the mimicry skills on anyone in the team, so you can just put that on him and you're going to be doing more damage with your counter and also take less damage from everything. So those are the two main arcs that I would recommend using, but there are potentially a few others you could use, like Cloud God Murder Uvis you could potentially use because you get 20% more HP, strength and defense, which will help with making them a bit more tanky. And if you're going up against enemies that are using magic, then a continuous high magic barrier effect will be very useful too. But this is a bit more situational than the other ones I mentioned because I just think Blaze Garden itself is going to be the best option in most cases. Another option can be the LR arc because it does give more counter damage and you do take less physical damage when you're on the ground, and you get a continuous Stonewall 2 effect to the unit. So I do think this is pretty solid, but I would definitely recommend Blaze Garden over this LR arc, honestly. So that is pretty much every arc that I would recommend. Honestly, there's not too many, but ideally you want to go for an arc that allows Guile to take less damage and also do more counter damage, and counter damage isn't very easy to increase with arc traits. So if you can't find one, or if you don't think you have a suitable arc, then you could just go for a tank focused arc instead. Like you could use Ganon because it's a decent tank focused arc. Like you get flinch resistance as well, which is going to be useful for him for sure. And just anything that allows him to take less damage I think is going to be very useful. So now I want to talk a little bit about him, comparing him to 2P. So I have Guile and 2P both at plus 30, so I have done some extensive testing with both these units, so I do know how good both these units are. I do think 2P is definitely less tanky. So 2P is very similar. She has all the counter boost skills, and I don't really need to talk about this because it is kind of a similar build to what I have with Guile, like very similar, kind of the same thing pretty much. And she is dual wield, so I think she's definitely going to be less tanky than Guile, and one thing that 2P does not have is the ability to just stand still and do nothing. So let's quickly spar someone, because why not? I just want to quickly show how Guile has been performing for me so far, and also 2P's on both teams, so you can see 2P's performance as well. Currently, my team is just a sit and do nothing team, so it's got 2 counter units and the other units are just not doing anything at all. So I'm just going to be doing this on auto and we can just see what happens. So Guile is going to be sitting there and he's going to be countering everything and doing a lot of damage. We will have a look at the damage chart after this battle has finished because that will be very interesting. This will still definitely take a while because they are tanks, but again, like I said, it's hard to tank against counter damage, and I have 2 counter units in this team. See, Guile's just killing a bunch of stuff as well as 2P. Guile's just crouching there doing literally nothing, which is the skill that I talked about that means on auto he's not going to move, he's not going to use any of his skills, which is what you want. You want him to sit there and do nothing. See, 2P just hit Guile. Guile countered instantly, and now everyone's dead. That was Guile, I'm pretty sure. Yep, there you go. So Guile killed Granados and 2P at the end right there. So let's have a look at the damage report and see what the damage was like. So as you can see, pretty much all of that damage was from Guile. And a funny thing is, 2P, which was the best unit in the game, did a lot less than Guile was doing, because Guile's counter is guaranteed as long as he's got skill stocks of his skill 1. So I guess you can understand now why I think Guile is an incredibly broken unit in this game and probably dethrones 2P in PvP content. One other thing that I want to mention quickly is, since Guile is just going to be crouching and sitting there doing nothing, 2P is literally going to die against a Guile, because if you have a 1v1, Guile will win 100% of the time, because 2P will not be able to activate her counter against a Guile, because a Guile will just be sitting there and not attacking. Once 2P comes over to Guile and does a normal attack against Guile, it will trigger Guile's counter, which, if it doesn't kill 2P, then 2P is just going to go and do another normal attack or a skill against Guile again. And then Guile's just going to instantly do another counter and then probably kill 2P on the second counter. At least that's what I've seen so far, so yeah. Do not use a 2P against a Guile, because you will lose. 2P will lose against a Guile, because a Guile is a better version of 2P. I am saying that, and I'm sticking by that, so yeah. Hopefully this video was useful to you. Hopefully you are more informed about counter damage and why Guile is so broken. Hopefully you managed to pull Guile, because he is a unit that I would recommend pitying, because he's just going to be a top tier unit for PvP for an incredibly long time. If you don't care about PvP, then it's not super important, but I still recommend to get him just because he's so broken. And if you care about good battles or arena, you should get him for sure, just because you're going to see him everywhere. And just be careful when you're fighting him. Just don't touch him. If you touch him, you're probably dead. If your mage or healer does a normal attack against Guile, then that will trigger Guile's counter instantly, and then do a long range counter attack towards that healer or mage and then just kill him. So he is a very big issue and incredibly strong, and I'm worried about when guild battles come back, because he's going to be a big problem and I don't know how to deal with him right now. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.